All right, today I'm going to show you the process that I use when I grade your paper. As you can see, the student has turned in their 2 envelopes. Now they don't have to be this color, they can be white, but this is about the size they should be, and this is how they should be labeled. Your name needs to be on there, paper, and then of course your source envelope. Okay, so when I sit down to have a good time, what I'm going to do is I'll have your paper on one side, and then your source pages right next to me on the other, okay? And remember, this pile of source pages is probably going to be pretty significant, or it should be. The first thing that I do is I go through, and on your paper, before I even read it, I'm going to go straight to the bottom of the page, and I'm going to see, okay, they used Nardo once, Ellis, Meyer. And on the Works Cited page, which I'll pull from underneath, I'm going to make a little tick mark for every time you use the source. So for this paper, you can see how she used the sources, and this helps me determine if you balanced your sources through the paper. Now, this student relied pretty heavily on these 2 books. Ideally, I like to see it spread a little bit more, but at least they're used about the same amount. And notice that for her other sources, and she's got one more than she had to, she has a 6th source, she's used all of them at least 2 times. So that shows me that there's a pretty good balance there, okay? That's the first thing I do. Then it's time to really get down to business and read the paper. Now, depending on your paper, you may or may not need a footnote in your introduction. It depends on how specific you are. This student's paper was about the American Revolution, and so she's really talking about some general things that would be considered common knowledge in the intro. Here's her thesis statement, underlined. And now, certainly by the time you get into the first body paragraph, I will be expecting to see footnotes. And that's exactly what I do see here. We've got a topic sentence, and then here's footnote number 1. Now, the reason I've highlighted this text is because the way that I read footnotes is that here's footnote number 1. You are telling me that all of this highlighted information, everything that came before it, came from whatever source you're telling me this is. To check that, I'm going to look over to your first source page. Okay? Now notice, and this is a requirement, that the student has labeled with the author, Nardo, that's the author's last name, and then a 1, this is not for page 1, this is for footnote 1, and that's what you'll have to do in your paper as well. I'm going to scan the page for the highlighted information, and then I'm going to read that highlighted information and see if it matches what you have put in your paper. Okay, now this is where things get a little tricky. It has to match in terms of the content, the facts. So you can't say something in your paper that's not on the page, but it also cannot match too closely. So not only am I checking for your factual information, I'm really also checking for plagiarism in this step of the paper. So be very careful, okay? In this case, the student had cited information that ran onto 2 pages. So the second page over here is also labeled Nardo 1 because it's still footnote 1, and this is where I found the remainder of her information, okay? Some of your footnotes won't have a lot of stuff highlighted. It depends on if you're just citing a simple fact or perhaps a summary of some information. Okay, this is footnote 2, and you'll see a few lines here. But notice for later in the paper, footnotes 32, the student had to highlight a great deal more information because essentially what she did is that she summarized some of these primary source quotes in the paper. So that may apply to your paper as well, okay? This paper was pretty well written. There weren't major source problems, but just to give you a sense of perspective on this other paper, okay? You can see where I have noted, and I've underlined this specifically, the student was talking about a number of weapons from World War II and makes the claim that all of these weapons were specifically designed for the battle. But when I went back and looked at the source page, the source did not say that. Now, it's possible the student did read that in a different source or maybe just didn't highlight it, but you'll get a note from me that your source doesn't support the claim. And so not only will you have a deduction for putting your sources together correctly, but you might also have a deduction for your proof of thesis. If you don't have the support that you need to prove your thesis, then you won't have proved it, and that's a double deduction. All right, good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. Do not leave this for the last minute.